Well, I'm happy to have another opportunity to talk to you about the Mosaic age and this overview of the Bible. And in this lesson, I'd like to look at the period of time of Joshua and the conquest of the nation or the land of Canaan and the driving out of those 7 nations that were in the land. The land was promised to Abraham and to his descendants. And it was said that when the sins of the Amorites were full, that the Israelites would be able to dispossess them of that land, and they would be able to have that land as their inheritance. Well, after 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, this new generation has grown up. As we saw in the last lesson, the leadership has been passed from Moses to Joshua. And God had promised that he would be exalted in the people's eyes and that they would respect him the way that they had respected Moses. And Joshua was going to be in charge of the people of God to bring them in to their inheritance and to the land of promise. A very faithful generation arose that had been cared for and raised in the wilderness. Those that are going to carry out this invasion and be so successful were people that were under 20 years old and or were born during the time of the wilderness wandering, since the time they came out of Egypt. And they grow up under God's protection and seeing all of the great wonders that God did in the wilderness to protect them. They've already been very successful in several battles before they crossed the Jordan into the promised land. So they're a very faithful generation that trusts in the Lord, and they have great success under Joshua. So let's begin to look at the book of Joshua, 24 chapters to the book. The first chapter, it begins with the Lord speaking to Joshua and giving him promises and encouraging him and exhorting him to be brave and courageous and not turn to the right or to the left in following any of the things that the Lord has told him to do. You can remember in Deuteronomy 34:9, now Joshua the son of Nun was filled with the spirit of wisdom, for Moses had laid his hands on him, and the sons of Israel listened to him and did as the Lord had commanded Moses. So he's going to conquer. He's promised in Joshua chapter 1. He's going to be one, if he will keep the commandments and not turn to the right or to the left, that God's going to be with him wherever he goes. No one is going to be able to stand against him. Well, after getting that encouragement about them being able to gain victory, he, as a good general, sends 2 spies into the land of Canaan to spy out the city of Jericho, the first great city that they're going to come to find out what their defenses are like and what the people attitude is and so on, and come back and bring a report. So even though God is going to be with him and help him through his providence and power to give the land, God expects us to do all that we can do within our power to carry out our duty and to be wise in the execution of the commandments that he gives to us. And Joshua shows that by making every provision here to be prepared to do his part in taking the promised land. Might remember where they're camped at the time that the spies are sent out. If you look at the map here, you can see that it has the Sea of Galilee at the top. On the east side, the Jordan River runs from about 600 feet below sea level down to 1,292 feet below sea level to the Dead Sea. That Jordan River, on the east side, the inheritance was given to the half-tribe of Manasseh, to Gad, and to the tribe of Reuben. And their soldiers had promised and given an oath to Moses that they would go with their brothers across the Jordan River, and they would continue to fight until they had secured their inheritance and been given peace before they went back home to their families that were going to stay on the east side of the Jordan River. You can see they are camped there just a little to the east of the Jordan, and they're going to go west and cross over the Jordan River to Jericho. In looking at the mission of the spies, they crossed in the, I'm sure it was a perilous crossing of the Jordan River, and they went in to look at the city of Jericho. And the map here shows you where the people of Israel were camped at Shittim, and then the spies went across the Jordan River and up to the city there of Jericho. And Jericho was a city of palms. It had was built there on a hill, as you see in the illustration. It had a great wall around it at the top, and then down at the bottom of the hill was a second wall. And we're going to see that God is going to knock those walls down and give this city to the Israelites. When they came into the city, they stayed at the home of a harlot by the name of Rahab. And she took them into her house, and it wasn't long till the people suspected them of being spies, and some of the people from the city of Jericho came to Rahab's house seeking the men. And she had taken them up on the roof and hidden them under some flax. And she went back down and told them that the men had already left the city, and they had gone down towards the Jordan River. And so the soldiers went down towards the Jordan River to try to catch the spies. She went back up on the roof, and she confessed her faith in God. It is a remarkable thing, the faith of Rahab, that she was raised in this pagan society. She was a harlot, and yet she had looked at the evidence of all of the things that God had done in delivering the people of Israel from Egypt with all of those great signs, and how God had taken care of them in the wilderness and helped them against the kings on the other side of the Jordan. And she had become convinced by the evidence that Jehovah was the true God, and that they were the people of God, and that she wanted to be saved because she knew God was with them. So she was a true believer and a remarkable believer. Out of all of the people in that city, she was the one that put these things together and determined to act on her faith in protecting the spies. And she asked them to preserve her since she had saved their lives. And they made a covenant with her that they would protect her and her family, whoever she got inside that room. She lowered the spies over the wall. Her house was built on the wall of the city, and she lowered a scarlet rope over the wall, and they were able to escape. And they told her to hang that scarlet rope in her window, and when the attack happened, they wouldn't harm her or anyone that was in her house where they saw that scarlet rope. And so she's going to become a part of the people of God. She's one of the ancestors of in the house of Judah, of David the king. And when you read the genealogy of Christ in Matthew chapter 1 and verse 5, she is mentioned and singled out as, one of the women that is in the genealogy of Christ. Kind of unusual in a Jewish genealogy in those days to mention women, but she is mentioned, and she is a great hero of faith, that she was willing to act upon her faith. The faith that saves is a faith that works. And Rahab is given an example of that kind of justifying faith that believes in God enough to act upon that faith. As you look at Rahab, she was preserved, of course, when everything was said and done. Well, the spies went back to Joshua, and in verses 22 through 24, it tells about them reporting what had happened in the land to Joshua. And after Joshua heard their report about the attitude of the people that they had seen, said, "Surely the Lord has given all of the land into our hands, and all the inhabitants of the land, moreover, have melted away before us." But recognized indeed the Lord had terrified these people. The dread of God was upon them, and surely God was going to give this land to the Israelites. So they have great confidence, Joshua does, that this is going to lead to a great victory. In chapter 3 of Joshua, he organizes the people for the crossing of the Jordan. They have 3 days in which they need to cleanse themselves, sanctify themselves. If they want God to be with them, they need to purify themselves because God is a holy God, and get ready for this crossing and be prepared to be the Lord's soldiers and enter into battle. And of course, there's a principle there that as spiritual servants and soldiers of the Lord, as Christians, we need to purify ourselves, cleanse ourselves, make sure that we are pure in our service to the Lord. The Jordan River at that time was in flood stage. It was the springtime of the year, and we're told that the Jordan had overflowed all of its banks. You can see in one of the pictures that I've put up there that was taken from Bible Encyclopedia. It shows how the river snakes through on its way down from the Sea of Galilee to the Dead Sea, and it is covered on all of its sides there by what's called the Pride of the Jordan, which is a jungle and very difficult to pass through. And at this time, not only are the immediate bank of the river flooded, but all of the banks of the Jordan are flooded. So it's flooded. All of that jungle area there is covered in water as it's rushing down, thundering down to the Dead Sea. You can see also some pictures from the early part of the 1900s when there was a great flood in the spring of the year, and you can see that whole Jordan Valley is flooded and filled with water. And that's what it was like when the Israelites came to cross over into the Promised Land. And God is going to perform a great sign and wonder in their crossing. It'll help give them faith and confidence as they enter in to conquer the land. Just like the former generation had crossed the Red Sea, this generation is going to cross the Jordan River. Just like Jesus began his ministry at his baptism, so Moses, the people were baptized into Moses at the Red Sea. Now it's as if they're baptized into Joshua's leadership here in the way that they cross over the Jordan to begin their work of conquest in the land of promise. So the Lord is going to give them directions on how they are to enter in to the land. And when they cross over and the people see the great sign that's going to happen, it's going to exalt Joshua in the eyes of the people so that they're going to look up to him just like they did to Moses. The priests were to lead the way with the Ark of the Covenant and walk into the Jordan River. And when their feet touch the Jordan River, the water is going to be cut off upstream. And the water then will run down into the Dead Sea, and the people are going to walk across into the land of Canaan on dry land. The priests are going to position themselves with the Ark of the Covenant out in the middle of the river. And as long as they stay there, the waters are held back until the people can cross over. So great sign, great assurance of their victory as they go in to fight against all of these mighty nations that are in the land of Canaan with all of their fortified and walled cities, that they are going to have success. So the Jordan River is turned back and the flow is cut off. If you look at the map where they are crossing from Moab across towards Gilgal is where they're going to make their camp, not far from Jericho. When they cross across there, the water is cut off up the river, if you see there, at Adam. There's sort of a place where the mountains come out further there towards the Jordan River, and at that place is where the water is piled up and cut off until the Israelites are able to cross over. And it begins to be cut off as soon as the priest's feet touch the water. And the people walk across on dry land. And while the priests are still stationed out in the middle of the river, they're to take 12 stones and bring them out of the Jordan River, out of the middle of the river, and pile them up in the camp that they're going to have at Gilgal. And that will be a monument that they will be able to use to tell their children about how they crossed over the Jordan on dry ground because of this great miracle that God had given them. There are a number of these stacks of rocks that are mentioned in the book of Joshua, that God sets up memorials so that we'll remember his mighty deeds. The Passover reminds Israel about their deliverance of the firstborn in the land of Egypt. We have the Lord's Supper to remind us about how Jesus died for our sins. And they are used and set up so that people will never forget the great events that took place to cause those memorials to be begun. And they're going to be able to tell about this wondrous work when they see that stack of stones in the future. There was also a stack of stones that was put out in the middle of the Jordan River that was still there at the time the book of Joshua was written, to remind the people how that water was cut off. Joshua is indeed exalted, we're told in verse 14, and the people look up to him as they did Moses. Then the priests left the river, and at the moment that they stepped out of the river, the water was let loose and began to flow back down. So there's a miracle on it being cut off when the priest stepped in. There's a miracle involved when the waters are released at exactly the time when they step out, to show that indeed God is with the people. Well, then they are consecrated for war. This is going to be a holy war. They're on a holy mission. The Canaanites are a very wicked people. Their sins are full. They're described in the book of Leviticus and Deuteronomy. Some of the sins of the people in the land that's causing them to lose the land. They are involved in great immorality, bestiality, sodomy, child sacrifice, all kinds of evil that was going on among these people, to the point that they're no longer fit to live as a nation and as a people anymore. They're like the people at Sodom and Gomorrah that God sent down fire and destroyed. They're like the people before the flood, that every intent of their heart was only evil continually, and God decided that he could no longer work with them any longer, but that he was going to wipe out all of those people. And that's what he did with the people in the land of Canaan. But instead of sending a flood or sending fire and brimstone down on them, he uses the sword of the Israelites in order to carry out this extermination of these people from the land. So the people that were in the wilderness, that were born in the 40 years of wandering, those children were not circumcised. So all of those people are circumcised. It's the time of the Passover in the spring, and after they heal from that, they are able then to lawfully take the Passover, and they have a Passover. It's the first one that they've had since they were at Mount Sinai. So here they have this great Passover feast to God, and they eat some of the produce of the land for the first time. And here the manna stops, because now they're no longer going to need the manna being given to them 6 days a week miraculously by the Lord, but they're going to be able to eat the fruit of the land from here on. So they are ready then to get their instructions on how to take the city of Jericho. There is the angel that appears to Joshua at this time, and he is dressed as a soldier, and he has a sword in his hand, and he tells him what they're to do in order to conquer the city. God is the one that's going to give them the city, and that story is told in Joshua chapter 6. God would give them the city by his power. The city would be given to them. They first have to show their faith. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell down. And so once again, God provides his grace, his help, but he expects his people to demonstrate and show their faith by actions, by trusting him enough to do the things that he says, even things that maybe the person doesn't think or necessarily make any sense, but you trust the Lord and do things in his way. And they need to march one time each day, the multitude march around that city. The priests are going to have 7 of them holding 7 ram's horns. They're going to be escorting the ark as they march around the city. And they blow those trumpets as they march around the city. And all of the people remain silent. I just think about all the men of Jericho. Each day they come out and they see this multitude of Israelites march around the city, and the people are silent. Just the psychological warfare involved in that, and shaking. You're getting all of your defensive weapons ready, maybe boiling some oil to pour over the wall or whatever, and you're all ready for battle, and then the people just march away. This happens 6 days in a row that the people come and march around the city. Then on the 7th day, they're to circle the city in the same way 7 times. But on the 7th time, when the signal is given, all of the people are to shout. And when they shout, the walls of the city are going to fall down. I have an illustration there that you can look at that shows what archaeologists have found. You have an upper wall around the city, and then lower down you have a bottom wall, and you can see how the city is built on a hill, and those walls fall down flat and provide a ramp for the Israelite soldiers to go straight up into the city and take it. And that's exactly what the archaeological evidence shows in that place. This city was placed under a ban. They were to kill everything in the city. They weren't to take any of the gold, any of the silver, anything from the city. But it was the first fruits of the city. It was dedicated to God, and therefore everything in it was holy and could not be taken. So after the city is captured, the city is burned. Archaeologists have found that layer of ash, and under that ash, they found pots full of grain and other things that are just left there underneath that fire. So you can see that the people didn't take any of those things out of the city after they conquered it. And so it was a great victory that God supplied for the people at the city of Jericho. Well, the next place they come to is a smaller city that's a little north and west of the city of Jericho, called Ai. And Ai is a city that Joshua doesn't think he needs the whole army to take that city. So 3,000 men are sent up to attack the city. And the people come out of the city and drive away the Israelites, and they suffer 36 killed. And they're quite upset about why in the world they lost this battle. Why hasn't the Lord God helped them as he promised to do? Joshua inquired of the Lord. He went before the Ark of the Covenant. He had dust on his head, and he's wondering why the Lord hadn't helped them. And he's told not to blame the Lord. It's not the Lord's fault, and we need to remember, if there is a defeat, it's never the Lord's fault. There was sin in the camp, God tells him. Someone took some of the things that were under the ban at Jericho. And because of that sin, the Lord was not with them there at Ai. It's the reason that they lost. Well, they began to cast lots according to each tribe. And then as the lot fell to that tribe, then they looked at the heads of each of the families in that tribe. And eventually the lot fell on a man named Achan. And Achan was told to glorify God and tell what he had done. And he pointed out that he had taken a Babylonian garment, 20 shekels of silver, and a wedge of gold. He looked at it, he coveted it, and he took it. And that's exactly how sin happens in our life. We see something that's unlawful for us to have, but is very desirable to the flesh. And then we start desiring it in our hearts and lusting after it. And then if we don't say no anywhere along the line, the next step is that you take the thing, that you get involved by an act of sin. And he took it home and buried it in his tent. It could very well be that his family also knew about those things that were buried in the tent, because Achan and his family were taken out and stoned by the people. And they purified this evil out of the camp. And then they're ready then to take the city of Ai. And there's a second attack in Joshua chapter 8. The camp has been purged, and now they're back on the victory trail, that they have dedicated themselves back to God. God gives Joshua encouragement that they're going to be able to take this city. The promise that he would give Ai into their hands. 30,000 warriors are sent at night to set up an ambush behind the city. There are 5,000 that are acting as a rear guard to protect the people if anyone comes from the city of Bethel to interrupt their battle. And they also have the soldiers under Joshua that go up and approach the city as they did before. And then when the king of Ai comes out to attack, they're told to flee, and they flee away from the city. And as the people, order is given for all of the men to go out and to pursue the Israelites. And they start chasing them down, towards the Jordan. And then the Lord tells Joshua it is time for the ambush to strike. And Joshua sticks out his javelin. And that's the signal for those 30,000 that are lying in ambush to come out. And they take the city because the men have left. They go in and set the city on fire. And that is a signal then for Joshua's troops to turn back and attack those that are pursuing them. And the men of Ai are surrounded on all sides. They turn and see their city being burned up. And then there's a great slaughter, and the city is captured and taken over by the Israelites. Archaeologists have recently found this city and find all of the layout and the circumstances to fit the time of Joshua and to indicate that the city did fall at that time. And it had the geography just as it is described in the book of Joshua. So there was a great plan of attack executed by Joshua, and they were able to take the city and gain a total victory this time around. Joshua built an altar to the Lord then as they moved up into central Canaan. They came to the city of Shechem. And at Shechem, there are two mountains that are there, Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. And half of the people are on Mount Ebal, and half of the men are to assemble on Mount Gerizim. In the middle is the Ark of the Covenant, and the law of Moses is read, and the 10 Commandments are read, and the blessings and the curses are read. All of the prosperity and blessings that will come if they keep the covenant and keep the commandments of the Lord and are faithful. It also told of all of the curses that would come upon those who violated the law of God. All of the consequences that would fall upon them if they failed to keep the covenant, if they failed to treat people in the proper way as God had told them to treat them. The people would say to each of the blessings, Amen, and to each of the curses, Amen, that they let it be so. At that place, Joshua had them to renew the covenant that they had made with God, recommit themselves to keeping that covenant and staying faithful to the Lord. He had fulfilled an obligation that was revealed to Moses that should be done once the people enter into the land by reading these blessings and cursings. And they wrote down the law on stone and placed it there. So then they're ready to continue with the capture of the southern part of the land of Canaan. At this time, there's a story told in Joshua chapter 9 about the Gibeonites that were some Hivites that lived in the land, and they pulled off a deception. They dressed in old clothes. They had worn out bread, moldy bread, and they looked as if they had journeyed from a long distance. They pretended to be people that had traveled a long distance and weren't from the land, and they entered into a covenant with the Israelites. And the Israelites swore to the Lord that they would have a covenant with these people. And then they found out later about the deception. And because they had made a vow to God, they went ahead and kept the agreement of sparing these Gibeonites, people from the city of Gibeon. And they were made hewers of wood and carriers of water and servants for the Israelites, but they were spared. And they stand for as an example of how people need to inquire of the Lord about things, and how physical things and going by what your eye sees, you can be deceived. And they had not found out about who these people were. They hadn't inquired of the Lord about what they should do. Well, as it turned out, the other tribes or peoples that are in the land of Canaan heard about the fact that now the Gibeonites had a covenant with the Israelites. And so there was a coalition formed of 5 different kings of 5 of the prominent cities in the area. And they united together in order to attack the Gibeonites. The city of Gibeon was one of the more significant cities in the land of Canaan at that time. Well, when they drew up in battle array against the city of Gibeon, they sent a message over to the Israelites that they should come and rescue them. So evidently part of their covenant that they had made with the Israelites is that they would, have a common defense. So Joshua leads the people over. He gets assurance from God that these enemies will be conquered and be given into their hands, and that the Lord would be fighting with them in this battle. And so even though there was a great number of soldiers and people on the other side, Joshua attacked these people outside of Gibeon and struck them. And we're told that the Lord confounded the enemy so that the Israelites were able to overcome them and put them to flight. And while they were fleeing away from Gibeon, turned down towards the south in the area of Aijalon, heading down in the highlands there that lead down to the coastal plain, the Shephelah. They are being pursued, and Joshua prayed that the Lord might give them time in order to be able to complete the battle and the victory. And it's at that time that the Lord caused the sun to stand still in the sky, and the moon. And even though the sun was in the middle of the sky, it took about an extra day longer for the sun to go down, giving the Israelites a chance to pursue their enemy and be able to win a great victory. There was never a day like this before or after. It is the example of almighty power of God. Miracles aren't explained exactly how God in his supernatural ability caused this day to be lengthened in the way that it was. It's something that happened, it's recorded, something that we receive by faith, that God was able to do. If he can speak the universe into existence with just a word, then certainly he can cause the light, from the sun and moon to bend in such a way that you get an extra almost 12 hours of daylight if God wants you to. Or he can suspend, the laws of nature in whatever way was necessary for them to be able to have extra time in order to defeat their enemies on that day. In addition, God sent down hailstones down upon these fleeing Canaanites as they were fleeing to the south, and we're told that God killed more with this hailstorm that came down upon them than were killed by the swords of the Israelites. And so this led to a great victory, and the Israelites were able to go then from city to city throughout the southern part of Israel, and all of that land later that was controlled by Judah and the tribe of Simeon, and conquer the people and take possession of that land. In chapter 11, we're told about the story of how they conquered the northern part of Israel. So they took the central part when they first came in. They had the blessings and the cursing. Then they had that battle at Gibeon, and then won subsequent battles and conquered all of the kings in the south, all the way down to Kadesh Barnea. And then they have a war with the Canaanites in the north. Again, there's a northern alliance of Canaanites where they get kings from five different cities that are in the north, or a number of different cities there in the north. And there's a battle that's fought at the waters of Merom. It's over, you can see on the map there, the Sea of Kinneroth, or the Sea of Galilee. If you go to the west of the middle of the sea there, you can see where the waters of Merom are, and that's where they met this coalition, and they were able to defeat them in battle, even though their numbers were like the sand of the sea. So it shows that figure of sand of the sea was used as hyperbole to describe a great number of men. It's not taken in literally, but it's taken to describe a great host. And God again communicates with Joshua. There are 12 different times in the book that God speaks to Joshua and gives him encouragement that they're going to be able to overcome and to win these battles, even though they're greatly outnumbered sometimes. And they end up capturing the most prominent of those cities in the north, which is Hazor. And they capture the city. They burn the city. And the other cities of these different kings, they also captured, but they didn't burn them. And archaeologists, again, have found the ruins of Hazor. They've dug down to that level. They found the evidence of the fire. And it was destroyed in the time frame when Joshua was leading the people and brought about this conquest. So we don't only have the words of the Bible presented to us, but we have, confirmation also from archaeology that this great battle was fought and this city was burned, and these things happened as the Bible said. So now they control all of the land of Canaan, and all of the promises that were given to Moses and to Abraham, those promises have been fulfilled, and they now control all the different parts of the land of Canaan and the land that was given to the tribes on the east side of the river. So at this point then, Joshua carries out the instructions that were given to him about dividing up the land among the 12 tribes, and they cast lots. And there's a description in chapter 13 through 21 of how each of the tribe was assigned their territory, and there's a description given of what their territories consist of. There's also a list of the cities of refuge that were placed among the different tribes, where someone, if they accidentally killed someone, they could flee there from the avenger of blood, from a family, and the person was able to get a fair trial to find out, whether they should be put to death or whether it was an accident and so on. So they had these judicial cities of refuge that were set up among the tribes. And also the priestly cities and the Levitical cities are described. The Levites were the special possession of God in place of the firstborn, and they were given these cities that were scattered throughout the tribes. They were places where they could do teaching and have influence spiritually with the people. And so also these are described in those chapters. And we have some final words that are given at the end of Joshua's life that he addressed to the people. Now, it took about 7 years for them to conquer the land. And then a number of years later, Joshua had become old. He dies at the age of 110. It states in chapter 23 and verses 6 through 8, you have a sample of the exhortation that he gave as he assembled the nation together before he died. He says, "Be very firm then, to keep and to do all that is written in the book of the law of Moses, so that you may not turn aside from it to the right hand or to the left, so that you will not associate with these nations, these which remain among you, or mention the name of their gods, or make anyone swear by them, or serve them, or bow down to them. But you are to cling to the Lord your God, as you have done to this day. This faithful generation has won all of these victories, but they didn't completely eliminate all of the Canaanites that were still in the land. There were some left behind for the next generation to finish up with and to conquer. But by all means, they needed to make sure they made no covenants with these people. They didn't begin to worship with them. They didn't have fellowship with them in spiritual things whatsoever, because they would be as a whip on their side and thorns in their eyes if they were to enter into any kind of relationship with them. So he tells them in verse 11, so take heed to yourself to love the Lord your God. That is the great commandment, to love the Lord with all your heart and soul and mind. So this faithful man, Joshua, he was brave and courageous. He didn't turn to the right or to the left. He led the armies of God to victory after victory. Even when they were defeated one time, they got things corrected and picked themselves back up and carried on the fight and set an example for all of us that even when we stumble, we need to get up and get back in the fight for the Lord. And here at the end of his life, he's still encouraging the people to be faithful to the Lord, just like he had been commanded to do, and to love the Lord. So the Lord had promised them many good things, and he had fulfilled all of his good word to them. And they needed to know assuredly that he would also fulfill all of the threats and curses that he gave them if they took up with other gods and violated the covenant that had been given to them. There's a final meeting where Joshua calls the people together at Shechem, and in verses 14 and 15 of Joshua 24, he says, now therefore fear the Lord, have reverence for the Lord, and serve him in sincerity and truth. So you need to have the proper attitude towards God. You need to be honest in your dealings with God. You need to serve him with sincerity and truth, and put away the gods which your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. If it is disagreeable in your sight to serve the Lord, choose for yourself today whom you will serve. Which the gods which your fathers served, which were beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose lands you are living. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. So he places before them a choice. You have a free will, and you need to make up your mind who you're going to serve. Your forefathers, many of them worshipped idols over beyond the Euphrates River in the land of Ur, where Abraham came from. Down in Egypt, there were still some that worshipped idols, even in the wilderness. But they needed to choose. Are they going to serve these gods or the gods of the Amorites? Or are they going to stay loyal to Jehovah that's given them everything they have, set them free from Egypt and give them all of these victories? Well, the people swore that they were going to serve the Lord. And Joshua warned them that it was going to be very hard on them if they failed to serve the Lord. But they renewed the covenant one more time with the Lord, that they would serve. The bones of Joseph, we're told, were also buried in the tomb there where Jacob was buried. And then, of course, Joshua also died. So that, and all of the elders with him. So a very faithful generation, a wonderful book that tells us about a very faithful man. May we all learn to be faithful under our covenant and not turn to the right or to the left. May we determine that we're going to stay loyal to the Lord and serve him and make up our minds to be committed. Brethren, I hope that this will be a good blessing to you to study about these principles in the life and in the book of Joshua, and that you'll read over these things and apply these great principles to your life of faith.